Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on this session. I will be discussing a very important topic that affects journalists and journalism in general. So, quick background for me, two major crises in recent times have highlighted the delicate nature of refugees. The COVID-19 pandemic showed that refugees, especially those in crowded refugee camps, are extremely vulnerable to the virus, and in many settings are not top priority for COVID vaccination. And many refugees are still in the middle of their struggle, not simply against war, persecution or famine, but against COVID-19, even though the world seems to be moving on already. And in the wake of the humanitarian crisis that arose from Russia's attack on Ukraine, prejudice against refugees, especially due to their nationalities, were played out in real time as some journalists inadvertently implied that refugees from Ukraine ought to be regarded differently than those from places like Syria or Africa. So this was a rude awakening moment for journalism, and this probably happened globally, and which is why on June 28th, the World Refugee Day 2022 was celebrated, and the focus this year is on the right to seek safety. According to the organizers of this celebration, every person on this planet has a right to seek safety, wherever they are, wherever they come from, and whenever they are forced to leave. And today at the ICFJ Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting, we are marking this celebration with a session on how to report on refugee communities. And we have an amazing panelist today, two amazing panelists with us. We have Louine and Ivan Mudok, and they are both veteran reporters. And so Mudok, by introduction, how are you doing, Mudok? Are you there?
Good, how are you?
Yes, thank you very much. So Mudok is an award-winning journalist and is the Middle East correspondent for Voice of America, currently based in Istanbul. Mudok covers the Middle East and North Africa for VOA. She has reported across the Middle East and Africa in countries in Europe during the European refugee crisis and on the Iran nuclear deal. Louine, on the other hand, how are you doing, Louine? Are you there with us?
Hi, Paul.
Yes, so thank you for joining us today. Louine is the chief of VOA's Burmese service, joining the VOA in 2004. Louine, after working for the BBC for more than a decade as a broadcast journalist. And during the 2002 sabbatical, he also worked with the national NGO Internews to establish the first Burmese journalism school in Thailand. And but Louine's story is even more harrowing because he was once a refugee himself. And I think Louine will tell us about that background. And based on that, I just want to thank our panelists for taking time to join us today, and our forum members and those that are interested in this topic of discussion. As usual, we're always excited in knowing where you are joining us from. So if you are in the chat box, you can enter, tell us where you are joining us from today, and our speakers might decide to probably localize or say some things that are specific for your geographical location. So please let us know where you are joining us from. We're excited that you are being with us. And if peradventure you are watching this live stream and you also want to engage with us, we are glad that you can also do that. Do not wait to the end of the session of the presentations for you to ask your questions. We already have some questions that were mailed in already to our speakers, and we are going to treat those questions at the time being. And so that's done. We'll start sharing the screen because they have a presentation for us that we'd like to take before we start engaging our audience with interactive session. So can you share the screen, Gary? While we are waiting for the presentation, oh, it's here already. And if you don't know by now, like I said, this session is being put together through a very nice support of the Voice of America. So we've done a lot of sessions together, and we hope to still do a lot of sessions together. The VOA has amazing array of very good trainers and journalists. So we are glad that they're able to work with us on putting this together. So over to you. I'll be back with interactive sessions. Good and Louis, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Bob. So, as he said, I'm a journalist for Voice of America. My main job is a field journalist, and I work in the Middle East and Africa mostly. I mean, recently, like everyone else, Ukraine as well, but most of my experience has been in Africa and the Middle East. And most of my work has to do with conflicts, and more specifically, with people fleeing conflicts and sometimes natural disasters as well, but mostly wars. Lewin, do you want to take a moment to explain why you're here? What brings you here today?
Yeah, that will be a little bit also introducing myself, plus I would like to prelude what I'm going to say something about that. So thank you, Paul, and thank you, Heather. My name is Stan Lewinton, Lewin, and I'm a chief of the Burmese service of the Voice of America. We broadcast radio and television direct to Myanmar or Burma, now they call it. So we have a US AGM 24/7 dedicated television stations, and we produce content from Washington, DC, and I have a few correspondents back in Burma, and as well as in some sort part of Southeast Asia to cover the issue in Burma. So I've been with the VOA for about nearly 20 years. So this refugee issue is very much a kind of a personalized issue to me, as Paul briefly mentioned about that. So I was kind of buzzing through my life as a kind of a displaced person. To be honest, it is a kind of, I started as a back in 1988 as a student activist. So because of I was studying at the time in a college final year to become a medical doctor. 3 months to go to become a doctor, but the political uprising came up, and then because of my student activities, I was expelled from school, and then a lot of my colleagues being killed and arrested. So fear of my own life and security or safety, I have to flee the country and arrive in the thick jungle of the Thailand-Burma border, where we get together again and then form a kind of an armed resistance force, very idealistic at the time. Anyway, we are living along the Thai-Burma border as a kind of a armed resistance force. But nearby at the time, while we were there for 2 years, I saw a lot of kind of displaced settlement where the few villagers nearby come and stay and kind of take a refuge, and also the refugee camps along the Thailand-Burma border. So during my time at the time, as a kind of a medic, and I saw a lot of children or adults who were killed or who died unnecessarily because of only diarrhea or malaria or infection from the wound or something like that. So that kind of, and also I work with a lot of kind of relief organizations together to organize things. So these are the kind of whatever experience I like to share in my earlier life. Later on, I arrived in England to getting a kind of political asylum, and I'm able to continue my study. And then there's, again, I have to pass through another displaced person life, asylum seeker. And then later on, I got a chance as a journalist in the BBC. So throughout my BBC career, I've been reporting on Burma issue, especially because of political issues, and then that political issue is actually main reason for the refugees fleeing the country. So my job again is covering the refugee issue. I cover child soldier issues. I cover some sort of girls from refugee camps exploited and then working as a slave labor or prostitute in a neighboring Thailand. So such a things are again. Then I went, after 10 years with the BBC, I went back to the Thailand-Burma border and ran a kind of with the Internews, International Media Development Organization, I ran a journalism school. And then at there, I trained a few refugees in and I helped set up the radio, internet, FM radio stations in the refugee camps, working with some sort of a young youth in the refugee camps. So such a kind of experience, really, I'm witnessing that the real refugee lives over there. Then we have a Rohingya issue. There's an emergency. So this emergency I have to cover while I'm working as a VOA journalist in the BBC. And after I came back and I arrived in the VOA as a chief, I have to manage all the reportings on the Rohingya refugee camps in the Bangladesh and Burma border. So these are my kind of the life experience and which is related to me and personally and my work. So I remind you that Burma is actually the fifth largest refugee, what I call producing country, so-called, as a source of the refugees, along with the Syria, Congo, and then South Sudan, and of course Venezuela. So later on, and of course Syria surpassed. This is where I leave it. And like Heather has experience in the Middle East and Africa, but I have more my experience in the Southeast Asia, Burma, Malaysia, and Bangladesh, where a lot of refugees are there. So this is my brief introduction. This is a little bit longer than what I expected, and so thank you very much.
Thank you, Lewin. So just to moving along quickly, there's a lot of reasons why reporting on refugees is important, but there's three main reasons, not necessarily the most important reasons, but three I want to point out. One, just the sheer number of people. There is 100,000, at least, this is just an estimate by the UN, forcibly displaced people, which includes refugees, internally displaced people, stateless people, in the world, which is about the 15th largest country in the world, if there were a country. And another important reason is that these people, this group of people, which is larger than most countries in the world, is extremely vulnerable and not protected by any government. They have protection by UN organizations, but these groups are only responsible for some of them, and they're still organizations, not governments. And then the third is just simply information. As journalists, we can get some of the best information about some of the most important events in the world. The best way to get it is from people fleeing the event. So like if there's a war and you want to know what happened inside, you can ask a soldier, you can ask an NGO or an investigator or an analyst or a government. And if they know anything, they learned it from people fleeing. And so our best source is refugees. I mean, as journalists, our families, ordinary people who fled the conflicts. There are some important topics that often get overlooked within refugee crises, and I'll let Lewin talk a little bit about some of these. There are many, but there are a few specific ones we'd like to point out.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I'd like to emphasize that the one thing why refugees reporting is important. Yes, of course, a lot of people interested in the refugee issue, especially in the kind of emergency, political crisis, or huge climatic issues, like the drought and something like that. When there's a kind of it is in the news, and then mainly talking at the time about the sheer number of the people fleeing from the seeking for the safety or fleeing for their own place for their food insecurity or something like that. But later on, as we know that news move on, there's a development, and then events after event, dramatic events after dramatic events, and so many at times, that the refugee issue being sometimes forgotten. So, and also why we are talking about the refugees issue, a lot of people tend to look at the basic why it is, or the real cause, like what a political crisis or famine or something like that. And then after all, there's and also how the aid organizations are working, how these number of the peoples are suddenly arrive and then living in their camps or something like that. But later on, when times go on, there's refugees, they don't disappear themselves. they get, because of that, of course, when they are fleeing from their own place, they are taking refuge for their safety. But of course, safety is that very, what I call, fundamental issue which is very appropriately at the focus of this year World Refugees Day, so right to seek the safety. So of course, safety is a fundamental issue, but after safely arrive in the refugee camps or something like that. So what is the real solution for what is their futures after war? So we know that the refugees want to go back home. Of course, everybody wants to go back home. So there may be a kind of voluntary repatriations if it is a country political situation, or whether climatic situations is getting better, or they can go back. But not all the time things happen that quickly, and then they don't have the chance. Or another thing is they integrated into the host country. And then there's a questions about that. Is host countries actually welcoming these refugees or allow to disintegrate or assimilate their communities in the huge populations or something like that? What is the nationality laws? Another one is a settlement, such as like me or not somewhere third country, but not those things are happening like that. So we have a term called warehousing problem. So many of the refugees are, or more than 70% of the raw refugee population is stay in the kind of camp, restricted their mobility, their encampments for more than 80 to 20 years. So their problem and the future of these people has to be looked into that and report. Thus, a constant reminder of the human tragedies, not only in the emergency, but also on that they are about their futures and about that other part of the war in the area that affect by that situation. So this is an issue I like to emphasize why our refugees reporting is important.
Okay, thank you. And so I'm just going to add a little bit about that's, what's important, but about working in refugee camps. I mean, you can find refugees in all sorts of other people, in all sorts of other places, in town, cities, they're just like any people, they can be anywhere, but you will find a lot of people who have fled their homes in camps, sometimes with tents, sometimes in cities like in Beirut, sometimes in makeshift buildings. A lot of the times when reporters get to these places and find they're calm and well run, which is not always true, but when they are, they'll see not much is happening. And sometimes I'll hear people say, this is boring and there's no story here. But this is never true. Every single person you meet in a refugee camp must have an incredible death-defying story. They would definitely not live there if they did not flee something extraordinary. And one trick is, if you don't know anything about the person you talk to, after you introduce yourself and get their name, and maybe ask a couple of questions about the job, you can start to dig in by asking about the very day they fled. This is a question that often works to break the ice, because it's a story people have often told before. It's usually an extraordinary story, and it's something that they may be comfortable relaying a lot of details to get started. So this kind of interview that I'm talking about, once you get started, can go on for a while, and refugee camps or other places where refugees can be a really good place to do long interviews. Often they are far enough away from the danger people fled so people are more relaxed, and there's often a lot of time people have time. There's often not much to do. But one thing about reporting in this areas, which I think I'm going to be really brief because it's really obvious, I think, to most of you, but you do have to always keep in your mind, and also make sure you keep in your colleagues' minds, that when you're visiting somebody in a tent or a makeshift home, it is their home. So occasionally I'll see people that will forget that they're walking into someone's home. So, just the normal things you would do, take off your shoes if the host takes off their shoes. So, I mean, you get the point. There's a lot of little things like that, but it is something to be aware of for you and people around you. Lewin mentioned before that there's also an issue when you're reporting on refugees that is often neglected about host countries. Refugees whether they are welcome or unwelcome in the country they live in, are not always welcomed within the community. So I'll let Lewin talk a little bit about the reaction of host countries. Specifically, in his experience, there have been some dramatic reactions.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. It is a very good idea, especially when you meet refugees and interview, maybe as an icebreaker, and you ask about the day they flee home. Of course, yeah, there's a lot of stories they have to tell. There's a lot of, from there, we can just simply guess that how much of the brutalities and how much of that, what I call discriminations or this unimaginable situation they having faced, So by that, we can understand that what is actually personal or kind of these what I call safety and security. I myself, of course, experienced these brutalities and violence and what I call violated by the armed forces and had to flee. A lot of other people, I saw that people beside me and next to me being shot at, and a lot of my former colleagues and sentenced to the life imprisonments. And why I escaped, I saw that I have my friends and serving the 20-year imprisonments in back home, and then a lot of people were killed or something like that. So there's a fascinating stories we have it. Not only on that, there's a lot of course about the nature of the ethnic-based discriminations, and also about the racial discrimination, and kind of especially the emergency like a Rohingya refugee issue. It is based on that what I call religious based discriminations, and they are not recognized as citizens only because of their ethnicities. The state that being a life of a stateless person, we learn a lot, and we know that. And after they arrive, as the first question by the Heather, to continue on about the situation of the host country. Of course, they arrive into the mostly a nearby border area between two countries. Hopefully, a more friendly host country who would willing to accept these, or at least temporary for those refugees or kind of the displaced person. But the thing is, there's a lot of limitations for the host countries. So I will tell you only about my very, very recent what I call experience. Actually, it was back in 2019. I visited refugee camps in the Thailand, Bangladesh, Burma border, and where nearly 1 million Rohingya Muslim refugees were taking refuge over there. And then the thing is, while I especially look at that kind of attitude of the home country and then locals. And then the first thing I look at is local television reportings and newspaper reporting about the situation. So the place they arrived in, this is a kind of place called very beautiful place, so called Cox's Bazar, where there's a huge and the longest beach and beautiful beach in the Southeast Asia. They boost in Bangladesh boost. So most of this is a kind of a leisure area for the Bangladesh, and then they try to develop as an international tourist attraction. But unfortunately, the refugee crisis happened, and then a lot of refugees from a neighboring country arrived, and they live in the makeshift camp nearby, and that became a kind of anxiety. And I saw in a newspaper, local newspaper, in a Bangladesh newspaper, saying, referring refugee as a kind of rubbish, destroying our environment, unwanted person, so push them back to their own country or something like that. At the same time, that host country, because of the ideal situation is to allow those refugees to be integrated with the locals, but the Bangladesh authorities, they do not. So for example, like a VOA is trying to what I call broadcast a radio program for the refugees over there, but authorities are very much unwilling to allow us, mainly because of they don't want their refugees to become a long-standing or to be there for permanently. Main thing is that they want the refugees to go back home or move to somewhere else. So that kind of situations we have to be aware of, and we are just also, when reporting the refugee issues, these things should be looked into it. And then apart from the previous issue I mentioned about, I witnessed a few girls, young women being what I call human trafficked to become a prostitute. Not only in Thailand, Bangladesh, I spoke with one of that person who actually reported to me with the pictures of these refugees girls being trafficked to nearby town and Dhaka, and even on to the Middle East country, rich countries. So that kind of situations we have to look at it. So this is the brief situation about the kind of attitude or of the host country, because those host countries, they have their own national laws, and they have most of them are not very wealthy country anyway in the regions, so they don't have much of a resource to provide, and also they have their own problem, like for example, like Bangladesh, they are Islamic country, but they don't want these refugees to be there and to be a ground of the what I call recruiting ground for the Islamic what I call extremists or something like that, and then drug trafficking or something like that. So they are not very much welcoming, and also they limited access for international aid organizations, so that make refugee life more miserable actually. So they start feeling crowded situation and futureless, and that sort of desperations, and they've been suffering from. We lost your voice.
Unmute. Hi. So this is what you're saying is very true, and you often find refugee camps are placed in the least desirable part of the country, far away from anything. Often, as you said, it's often the host community is often poor itself. So in Sudan, when the Ethiopian at the Tigray crisis in 2020, when people fled to Sudan, the camps there are all in border areas, really far from many cities. And the communities did do a lot to help the people, the Ethiopian people coming across. But you could also, not very long after, you could also hear the strain from host families and hear racism and hear, problems arising. And it's not necessarily always badly intentioned, but it does create tensions. The next topic I wanted to talk about, which it sounds academic, but it's really not, is language and narratives. Language surrounding refugees is used as a weapon sometimes by governments or enemies of displaced people for whatever reason. And it's also used by NGOs to serve their own purposes. So our goal is to try to use the language accurately and also neutrally. There's a toolkit, a tip kit that the ICFJ sent out online that we can find after, that talks a bit about this. And I'm going to just quickly give some details about what it's about, but they give some good details about how to deal with it in terms of in the writing. So the dictionary definition of a refugee is simply a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. So tens of thousands of refugees fled their homes. That's the definition. However, the United Nations has a legal definition. You can find the legal definition and all of the details in the United Refugee Conventions and following protocols, the convention and protocols. It's not a lot of documents, it's not that complex, but it is important to know the legal definition and the dictionary definition are not the same. The other word, and the word that is often used as a weapon, is the word migrant. So the UN will say, it says, actually, I'll just read this. Migrant is, while there is no formal legal definition of an international migrant, most experts agree that an international migrant is someone who changes his or her country of usual residence irrespective of the reason for migration or legal status. UN officials will be quick to tell you that usually a migrant move because they want a better life, a better job. Now, this is super important to put some context in it, because when you meet so-called migrants in the field, you'll meet people that, yes, they might have moved. I mean, they might fit the UN's definition. It's not a legal definition of migrant. They might have moved to get a better job, but that does not mean that they had a choice. Like if you meet someone from, for example, from the Niger Delta in Nigeria, this is a place you meet people sometimes in Europe that they fled across the Sahara Desert, all the way through the southern Libya, which is a place where there's a lot of kidnapping, rape, ransom. It's extremely dangerous. They survived that, get to one of the sea towns, or Tripoli, and manage to survive to cross the sea into Europe, while so many people die along the way. They survived all of this horrible journey. They didn't do it just because they didn't like their job at the ice cream shop. They did it because they needed to move to survive. One other reason why these words are important is that they're used actively in the news by governments. So, for example, not many people recently have been arguing with this sentence. As Russia surrounded Kyiv, thousands of Ukrainians fled the city. Ukrainian refugees, sorry. Thousands of Ukrainian refugees fled the city. Now, other governments, at the same time, sometimes on the same day in the same newspaper, would dispute this one. As the Taliban took over Kabul, thousands of Afghan refugees fled the city. The UN could tell you that legally, neither of these are true because they're not officially refugees until they're designated refugees. But common sense and the dictionary definition tells us that people fleeing the Taliban in Afghanistan and people fleeing the Russian army in Ukraine are refugees, and they can be referred to as such. Sorry, I just got a little carried away here. So there's also certain narratives that I try to be aware of and try to, either if they're false or misleading, keep out of my stories. And if they're said to me by authorities, try to follow up to get more information. So we talked about the migrant narrative, refugees travel for a better life. But there's other narratives to be aware of, like, for example, voluntary repatriation. There's sometimes you'll hear that this happened and a lot of people went home and they went home by choice. This is not usually such a clear-cut thing that happened if you talk to the people that actually went home. It does happen that people do choose to go home. They give up. They're not going to get refugee status wherever they are and they want to go back. But most of the time, in my experience, when you hear a voluntary repatriation, the people don't really have much of a choice. They're not necessarily forced by gunpoint, although that does happen. And so good to follow up on anything like that. You hear about it, ask the people that experienced it, and you will often find a different answer than what you were told. Gwyn, I was just wondering, is there any other false narratives that you would like us to think about and be aware of?
Yeah,
While we're doing this?
I totally agree on these what I call language issue, because of some of those language sometimes used and are accompanied with a kind of a stigma. So the thing is, like, now I noticed that even for the War Refugee Days, there's a carefully using something about, for those people who are forcibly displaced around the world. So even for that definitions, about 100 million people who are forcibly displaced around the world. So even under this what I call expressions, we have those people mandated and protected by the UNHCR or UNRWA is only about constitute only about 30 millions. So the rest, for example, like if 70 millions is internally displaced person, or sometimes something like asylum seeker in other countries, or that's kind of different things. But sadly, what one comes to the issue about a refugee, for example, the namesake. because of the, especially in the economic downturn in a host country, either in a first, second country, host country, or third resettlement country, especially for the economic depression or some kind of problem situation, they are just simply what I call accused as a kind of, okay, the a pointed finger to them, and then they are not preferably treated very well. So a lot of discriminations against refugees and things, and you see that in Europe, and then even in America, you can see that as a kind of such a thing happening. So that refugee name itself, in that sense, is kind of carrying the stigma for those refugee as well. At the same time, there's a mistaken word, refugee and migrant. Some people say that or the refugees are looking for the better place to live them, instead of properly understanding that they are actually people seeking the safetyness. So nobody, with my experience, and I know that I met a lot of several thousands of refugees, majority, of them, all of them, they love home. Their main reason is to go back to their home, because of they are just simply came out because of the brutality they experienced, because of the war, because of the violation of their rights being violated, and because of that. Think about it. When there's a kind of people or villages caught up in the warring situation, they cannot what we call grow food and things. They don't have livelihoods at all, and they don't have food, and so they have to move to somewhere they can find food, or somewhere they will not be being killed. And at the same time, there's a lot of tactics by that kind of the brutal military forces, and especially, I will tell you about the Burma. For example, like the Burmese forces, when they are dealing with that rebels group, they are just simply practicing what they call it four-cut strategy or something like that. So this is what they call it. It is intentionally what they do is cutting the intelligence to the opponent, other recruit food, and then kind of these funding. So that means that the militaries and these troops never don't want to villager to stay their own place, because they are worried that these villagers are source of information about the troop movements, or providing food to the rebels, or kind of supporting fan, or that's a lot of or recruitment. So they just simply kick them out and force them out. They burn the villages, and then they kill the villages. So they scare a lot of scaring tactic. So only because of that. But most of the refugees I know that encounter is they want to go back home when there's a situation is resolved or stable or well, or what I call good enough for them to go back. But only after that they have experience with that encampment situations in the for a few years, they start thinking about their futures for themselves or their children, for their education, for their better life. So that time they might be thinking about the better life. So refugees moving out or settle in somewhere for the better life. I don't say that it is not true, but there's a situation, there's a stories behind that. Of course, I will not refuse that. Okay, these refugees are settled here in America for a better life. True, yes, but there's a story behind that. We need to know that. We need to present these set of things as a reporter for those public to understand, and then just simply sympathetic, and then be a bit more supportive to that war situation.
I think what you're saying is very true, and every refugee, every person, displaced person I've met in 12 years in the field, has, actually not everyone, but almost everyone, does want to go home and does long to go home. But I once heard a high-level NGO.
When I fled Burma, I want to go home. My ultimate what I call thing is, of course, I fled. I was fearful of my life. And then definitely, if I don't flee, that I will be arrested or be killed. So I escaped. But my ultimate intention is to go back home. But unfortunately, but I'm a fortunate, most fortunate displaced person among the refugee probably. I have a chance to go out to the other country, continue the studies, and to become what I become now. But anyway, after that, I have a chance to go back home only 23 years after that, of the day I left. So, but how I felt at the day when I had go home is undescribable. When I
Mm,
touch down from the planes and I go back home. And so that's why I emphasize all those people, refugees or whatever, people, they want to go home.
sure. Yes. One thing to be careful of, though, or I guess just in terms of our advice as journalists, is to keep what he's saying in mind, because I've heard high-level officials, very high-level officials, say that same thing without finishing the sentence. So I interviewed a guy in Geneva who said, every refugee I've ever met wants to go home, as he said. But he didn't finish the sentence, because every refugee he's ever met did say they want to go home, but they also said, if
That's a
it was safe,
voluntary
if I could
repatriation.
go home, if I could feed my children, if I wouldn't go to jail, if I would live. So yeah, so that's another important narrative
We
to keep in
use
mind,
the word
because
go home
sometimes,
with the dignity.
yes,
Dignifying home, going home.
so,
And also, this is a kind of the ultimate, what I call, solutions of the refugee issue anyway. If the political situations and the situation in the back home is kind of favorable, and then there's a dignifying way to go back home or something like that. Most of the refugees, they volunteer themselves to go home anyway. So this is the main, what I call, reason for those international aid organizations and UNHCR as a kind of first priority. They encourage and resolve the situation back home and make it for all those situations favorable for the refugees to go back home. Because there's another situation, as I described, like integration with the host country is very much kind of impossible, for too much on the against the national law and then a lot of culture things or something like that. And also about the third resettlement in the third country. How many people? There's a kind of very fractions of the population of the raw refugees have a chance to resettle in that third country. So this is a little bit of a kind of ongoing situation. Of course, we are saying that refugees and volunteer repatriation with their dignity is a kind of a favorable outcome. But since that never happened, so we have a problem, as I mentioned, about the warehousing situations coming. So this is a situation I like to say that. Thanks very much for that reminder, or to make a kind of a statement. All the refugees are not want to go home or something like that. But we are not definitely, nobody should force them to go back home anyway.
right, that is true. So for the remainder of the time, we have two things. One, we have some, and maybe Paul, you can jump in with how you'd like to do this. We've got a couple of scenarios that we would like to put to everybody, to tell, to maybe discuss how they would deal with this issue. And we also have some time to take questions. So if it's okay with you, Paul, perhaps we'll put forward a couple of scenarios and then take questions. Does that work? Or do you want to go to the questions first?
Yeah, looking at the time, we already have like 5 questions for you.
Okay, so you want to start with questions, and then if we don't get to these scenarios, I'll just post them.
Yes, I think it's better if we go to the questions. So what I've been able to is, thank you very much for those insights that you've shared. I think I have the questions on your screen. So the first question comes in from Alison. Alison would like to know, the first question is, what are the key legal issues that journalists need to get clear with before reporting of refugees? And the second question is, I understand journalists' exposure to some traumatic scenes, but how do you journalists often navigate through your work? So those are the 2 questions. Sad, do you want to go?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the first one, and maybe Luann, you want to take the second one? Does that work?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so legal issues that journalists need to understand before reporting on refugees, besides understanding what refugees are legally, and having this background, it's not so terribly complicated, but you need to understand it so you don't confuse legal jargon that you'll get a lot from NGOs with just the facts on the ground. You also need to know the legal status of the specific refugee crisis that you are covering, and it can vary greatly. Like, for example, there are camps that are actually essentially detention centers, and often these people don't have any legal refugee status. And so people will be talking about their rights, but you should know what their actual legal rights are as per international law, and if possible, as per the country they're in, before reporting on them. Or you should also know what are their legal rights as per international law, so you can actually be a watchdog, be the fourth estate to see if they're actually being granted their rights. I mean, there's a huge amount of cases nowadays of people being pushed back out across borders without getting the chance to claim asylum, which is their legal right. And this happens all the time. And this is just one example of the rights of refugees, the rights of families fleeing conflict being violated. So being aware of those rights, you can report on when they're violated. Lynn, if you want to talk a little bit more about that or about the second question, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's based on my experience. Whenever we try to enter throughout my careers, reporting on the different issues, I visited refugee camps in the Thailand-Burma border and Bangladesh Rohingya camps. Most difficult thing is to have access into the refugee camps. So there's mainly because, as I mentioned, that host countries, they don't want refugees to move roaming around freely. So the camps are tightly controlled, access are tightly controlled, and then a little bit of a difficult to get access into there. And then so that's one of the issue with the what I call, in that sense, it is a really well set up refugee camp even. But the most dangerous issue I like to add is, okay, we are talking about well set up refugee camps on the border of this site. But what about access to the IDPs, internally displaced person? Because they are the same people as the forcefully displaced for reasons. So they are trapped in the other side of the border. So to go and get information from them or to report on them is you need to take your own risks. Because of that, you cross the international border where you are not very much welcome at all in that sense. There's a landmine. There's a lot of other side of the security force who might be accuse you of spying or aiding the enemies or something like that, whoever. And then also other disease and a lot of issues. So to reach out to these internally displaced persons are more difficult. It is somehow to go and report, and legally is impossible sometimes. But it only because of its illegal practice or to go inside there and report or get information from them. No, we have to do sometime. We need to take our own risk in that sense. So we have to use a lot of locals and a lot of what called friendly organization to help us to go to have access in information, and just simply to report on their dire situations, their story as well. So about the trauma. Of course, journalists, whenever you go and report, I'm really sure that Heather, you have a lot of experience in a most gruesome situation, and while you're reporting in the Middle East and then Syria and Africa. At the same time, as myself as a displaced person at the border, and also while reporting in the Rohingya refugee camps, I saw a lot of what I call people who told their kind of unbelievable brutal stories, and also met former victims of human trafficking, girls who've been what I call raped, or the girl who've been sold as a prostitute and rescued or something like that. So for them, that after hearing their story, these stories, resounding in our eyes, and sometimes, I don't know how much of the trauma is remaining there, but certainly there's a lot of traumatic experience, and visiting these situations and reporting on, let alone about those, of course, sometimes very violent situations about you see some sort of amputees and a freshly wounded person fleeing from the battle or something like that. Luckily, I don't experience in my later life, like that. But while I was in a students resistance force working with the refugee camps, I met a lot of those landmine victims, fresh, and then a few people is dying just in front of me, and sometimes it's remain in my what I call thinking or something like that. So I don't know. Sometimes I know after the retirement life or something like that, if I like to do this peacefully, I have to go for the counseling or something like that about those issues. But very important for reporters to be prepared about what kind of situation you will encounter, what kind of story you will be hearing, and then you have a lot of emotionally, what I call, affected situation you will be definitely encounter.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have more questions. The next question is this. I think this is regarding the VOA's refugee coverage. So I want to know the efforts of your organization in trying to report refugees and communities in Nigeria. Can you be please?
Definitely, Heather.
Okay, so I actually left Nigeria in 2014 after being there for 2.5 years. Voice of America has a large presence in Nigeria, and I can't speak for the Nigerian audience to say if we're doing a good job or a bad job, but I know we're doing a lot of stuff. In the English language service, we have, pretty sure still now, but we almost always have a full-time reporter in Abuja. And that was me for when I was there. There's also quite a few Hausa language reporters, and they are very active and also well listened to. As you know, there's a lot of languages spoken in Nigeria, and I do feel like the one thing we are lacking in Nigeria is a larger variety of language. So I think if you are Nigerian and you are interested in interested in VOA coverage, that's something that I would like to see more of, and I'd love our audience to tell VOA we want more of that, because we do report in almost 50 languages, so why not Yoruba? Like, we should. Anyway, you can see our Nigeria coverage online in Hausa or in English, and also we appear regularly on Channels TV. I don't know, Paul, do you watch Channels TV?
Yes.
When I lived in Nigeria, I used to watch it all the time. In fact, I bought a TV just to watch Channels. So we do that. We work closely with Channels TV as well and provide news packages and appear live on their shows from time to time from all over the world.
Yeah, and apart from Nigeria, you know that as far as I remember, please correct me, that knowing that the reporting on refugee is very important, and also it should be a kind of not only about the crisis reporting or not only about kind of a reporting for the emergency situation. VOA realized that, and we have started that refugee what I call reporting department, and that's back in 2017. I believe that we start dedicated a group of journalists and a bureau for especially for refugees, and so we also in that sense, VOA have extended refugee reporting what I call department for opening that Rohingya Lifeline programs, daily 15 minutes radio program, and also we have a dedicated website and then a lot of refugee-oriented or refugee issues reporting. So main issue, I believe it is, as I said, that not only about the crisis or emergency situation, but consistent reporting on that situations and help finding for the proper solution for that very, very important issue. So that's my what I call supplement to what I know about that. So that's a refugee reporting is very big and very important for the VOA, Voice of America.
I do think that, just to add one more thing about Nigeria specifically, that one thing we're missing a bit of, and I don't mean just VOA, I mean the media as a whole, is in northern Nigeria, northeastern Nigeria, there's a lot of displaced families, and a lot of them come further south into Abuja, but into the cities, but a lot of this displacement crisis is undercovered by the media, partially because it's difficult to access, but it's partially just undercovered, and that should change.
Okay, yes. So we have on the line Amini Kakule, I think who's joining us from Congo.
Oh, hi.
Have a mic. Hello, can you talk? Can you unmute yourself? Amini, you have your hand raised. I think we'll come back to Amini.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
That's okay. Can you hear? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. I'm terribly sorry. I was a little bit late.
Okay.
And it just hello.
Hello. Okay.
Hello. Yeah. And my question was actually when reporting the refugee camp, like when we just enter just in the refugee camp, we have to have accreditation from UNHCR so that you can be allowed to go and make a report just in the camp. For me, I feel like it's not like freedom of speech that journalists are granted. But why should we have accreditation? Whereas simply when we are known as a journalist, you have to go and make your story without going here and then to get some accreditation. So for me, I feel like they're just hampering this freedom of speech. So I don't know how really with when reporting with refugees, if really freedom of speech, or let's say accreditation really are allowed when you want to make a story in refugee camp and so forth. Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. Like the UNHCR, when they try to accredit you to go into a camp, I mean, yeah, you have to follow their rules if they control the camp and they control the doors, because you have to get in the door somehow. But I agree. Like it depends on the camp, depends on the country, and it depends on the day sometimes. But yes, organizations do try to control speech, try to control what refugees can say or not say, and they often use accreditation as a tool to control what we are reporting. And it's wrong. And that's another thing we should be reporting on.
There's a lot of gatekeeping, so bureaucratic gatekeepings, especially by the local authorities, and not only with the UNHCR and also local authorities who is in charge of running the camps. So, but basically, I think that of course, and when you go through the bureaucratic procedure, you will be very much likely accompanied by those authorities, and then kind of they are camp agents or something like that. Very my experience, and whenever I go in there, them I might make a kind of separate trip to go have a kind of contact with that a lot of local refugees themselves, or some other kind of a non-government international organization, which are actually very doing the background work over there, and then get a lot of, you need to know a lot of stories beforehand, and to go inside and then to talk with the real people over there. Of course, you need some areas and very tight security, you need the bureaucratic kind of permissions, but there's a lot of issues you have to go through. That's my experience.
Okay, lots of questions, lots of people want to talk, so I will give the mic next to Beatrice. Beatrice?
Hello, I'm Beatrice. I'm from Kaduna, Nigeria.
Yes.
Okay, and earlier Hida was saying that some of the stories in Nigeria, especially in the northeast, northwest, is undercover. So how do we report those stories and we don't get into trouble?
I think one, thank you, Beatrice, first, by the way. And I think one sort of trick, at least this is just a start, somebody else can add more, but in terms of reporting what's going on in northwest and northwest Nigeria, and issues that are quite sensitive and you're afraid that you will get punished for reporting them, sometimes a way around it is to keep it to personal stories, like not making a report about what the government's doing, about what Boko Haram's doing, but making about what this particular family went through. Your readers will know you know, that this, you know, whatever they went through, they will, you know, I assume it's going to be something that is difficult and hard, or maybe horrible. Otherwise, I'm not sure. Like I would assume that would be the topic, and they will know the situation that brought them to it. So that's one way. Another thing to think about, though, is that a lot of stories are dangerous to do. And if you are living inside the conflict and inside the area where you are subject to be in danger from doing your story, you have to think carefully about when to do that story, or if to do that story, or if you can pass it on to somebody, because you're not going to be able to be a great reporter if you're in jail or you're dead. Like you have to mitigate what you report, and sometimes in order to just to stay alive sometimes.
Yes,
so that's just one trick. I'm sure there's lots of others. I mean, we all think about this every day. How do we report this and also get out alive and not in jail? So it's a really difficult, tricky thing that you have to deal with all the time.
That's personal safety.
And I think we are Chidozie, are you ready, Ibrahim? We have Chidozie and Ibrahim.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you.
So let's go back to
Hey.
Bart. You have the floor.
Okay, sorry. But first of all, you guys like hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. So my name is Ibrahim Ali, and I'm Syrian living in Turkey. And I've been actually like cooperating with outlet media, like, I don't know, like probably 10 years so far from the uprising, since the start of the uprising. So since we were talking about like actually passing the story to someone else and trying to not put yourself in risk, and I'm here gonna like actually evolve in about a situation where I did the same. But what happened that when I was like directly in the problem, I didn't have any evidence that I was doing that. And that was like actually a major case which actually expanded in some point in the last couple of years for too many journalists or too many citizen journalists from the Syrians, specifically in Turkey, where they didn't even have like a way to even prove that they were actually active in actually reporting about refugees or the conflict of refugees in Turkey. And at the same time, didn't even have like a way to change their situation when they were like in the like red priority risk. So in this case, what do you guys first like actually suggest for us to do? Another major problem that we have is that I think some of you guys like know that we have what we call it now the alternative media, which is actually some of the Syrian community who's actually have their own news media, and they're trying to report about the Syrians. But the funny part is that they are registered in Turkey. So basically, because of the restrictions and what they have about the fears of like actually losing the registration and all that other stuff, they're trying to pass all those conflicts about the Syrian and not even report about it. So as Syrians trying to report about it, we don't have any platform to do it, but we try to jump to foreign media, trying to do some pitching about it. And then we, stuck in a wall where we have our second language. It's not like that we're so perfect in doing it. We're trying, but most of the time we fail. So I don't know what we have to do about those two situations. We try to look a lot in the African like actually experience about it. It's a little bit different here. So we don't know what to do. We need your suggestion. Thank
you for that quick.
Thank you very much.
So, well, I live in Turkey too, and it is really tricky here. I mean, there's no simple answer to the question, Ibrahim. But I guess one question: are you talking about alternative media, like local Turkish media that's spreading propaganda against Syrian refugees? I've seen a little bit of this.
No. I'm talking specifically about the Syrian media. We call it alternative media, which actually, we have two types of Syrian media. We have like pro-regime media, and we have alternative media, which is actually pro-revolution and pro-like democratic. And those guys actually always have the fear that we might lose like the registration, the department, and like because most of them based in Turkey. So they pass or like trying to take like actually a blind eye about some situations where they think that if we report it, we would get stuck. And personally,
I know some people in this situation as well.
Yeah, sure. So that's what I meant by alternative media. Thank you.
I mean, it's a complicated situation, and I think it's something everyone's trying to navigate, especially as things get tense closer to the election in Turkey. Lewin, do you have any like specific suggestions of how we should navigate this? Because honestly, Ibrahim, I have the same question.
Yeah, I don't have a kind of a specific experience or deep knowledge about that particular situation in Turkey and this Syria or situation, because my specialty is in the Southeast Asia. Especially we face that kind of situation, what Ibrahim mentioned about the alternative medias. So it's as I understand from him, is like a kind of the media who are pro-democracy and as an anti-government, I believe that. So there's like kind of journalists and organizations definitely face that kind of persecutions or oppressions by suppression by the authorities anyway. Either they close down your what I call source of the informations, or either you close down your publishing or radio stations, or arrest that or intimidate your journalists. So we have situations like that, and a lot of journalists become a kind of a first target in that sense in an area. Whenever there's a conflict happen, so they a lot of the oppressive or regimes or militaries, and they first look at their side of the story to be out to the public. They don't want such alternative media outlet to be carrying some sort of anti that kind of military or anti what I call dictators message or informations. So that's why they first looking at the situation to this kind of group, and then that's mean in that sense, a lot of people flee the country. You know, I saw a lot of journalists fled the country and then seek the kind of organizations like international organization. I know that ICFJ help a lot of these what I call displaced journalists. There's a few programs I heard about that kind of materially or some sort of booklets. They also talking about the personal safety and security advice or something like that. So like us, we're organized, we're established organization. We do have a lot of cautionary measures to be deal with that in such a situations, and in the kind of hostile environment. How do we go around and how do we look after ourselves? But at the same time, some sort of a stringer or local reporters are also facing that sometimes same situation. So it is not that kind of easy to answer question anyway, but we do have a sense as a journalist, we know that we smell that the danger anyway. So we have to deal with the situation according to.
Yeah, so we have Dorcas and Chidozie live on the line, but before we go to them, I have to take 2 questions that were typed in. So the next one is this. Currently, there is a debate in my newsroom concerning the right term to use when reporting refugee stories. Do we talk of refugee camps or settlements? Some colleagues are of the opinion that talking of camps is somehow diminishing for refugees. So let's start with Lou, and I'll come back to Mudok on
that. First one, we already addressed it about the Nigeria, I feel that. But about the terms, it's just a little bit of, I don't know, I never encounter about that kind of argument or debate about whether we should call refugee camps or settlement. I feel that we basically talk about that refugee camps, and I don't know, so mostly as far as I know, we talk about the refugee camps, where we visited, where all those displaced persons gather in this side of for safety. These are also few of them are recognized by local authority, host country, or recognized by the UNHCR, and where all the international aid organizations determine that this is a place where they should deliver or organize their aid organizations or relief organizations. These are the refugee camps. Or settlement, I don't know. This is very much in English anyway. But there's some sort of issue probably about how do we refer IDP camps or IDP settlement. That's another issue, that there's no such a kind of a well-founded or well-organized, what I call a flow of organization, how to reach that aid or relief or something like that. But as far as I know, refugee camps, and when it is recognized, and there's a structure for the refugee for themselves, administrative structures and a relief distribution structures or something like that. So I think this is my vague answer. So Heather. Yeah, I think.
Just the only thing to add is that you can ask the people who are living there. If they call it a camp, then it's fine. But if they don't like it, then you can find another term.
So yeah, I like that response. Chidozie, are you ready? Dorcas, are you ready?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
can you hear me?
Let's go with Chidozie followed by Dorcas. Go back to back, please. Chidozie, you have the floor.
Hello.
Okay, Dorcas.
Yeah. Actually,
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Greetings to everybody. I think it's a pleasure to be here, and so far I've learned a lot from is it Lynn or Win and Mudak. So I'm Dr. Sekupe. I'm a Cameroonian residing in the far north region of the country, where we have the menace of the Boko Haram sect, climate issues, and we also have the Minawaro refugee camp found in the Mayuchinaga division, where a majority of the refugees are from Borno State, Nigeria. I have a problem, just like one attendee mentioned, to get into the camp, you lots of things to do. You write a letter there, you go there. Sometimes it's very discouraging. And meanwhile, the camp has a lot of stories, even the surroundings of the camp. We have lots of unreported, meaningful and engaging stories that we can do in the camp. But access in the camp is really difficult, and it's discouraging. Before we could enter there the way we wanted, but just of recent, there have been this restriction. So what's the way forward? Because I've been in the camp, I've covered a story there with Plan International, and when I got into the camp, I was just inspired. Life in the camp, lots of stories, like I said. So please, I just want to hear from you. And also I want to say that the region has a lot of stories. The far north region, it has a lot of stories. Sometimes I see these stories go unnoticed, but I think being here, I've seen people that I think I could pitch my stories to. So thank you.
And Chidozie, are you ready?
Chidozie is muted.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Chidozie. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, my name is Chidozie. I am a journalist. I'm also a publisher. I want to appreciate all of you for this very important meeting. Yes, my questions. My question is more or less with that of Dorcas. Yes, I want to ask. Well, we have a lot of refugees here in fleeing to Nigeria from other countries, and like most of them, no database, there's no database. So none of them come with intention, for to do a lot of crimes, to commit a lot of crimes and a lot of atrocities and killings. And I want to ask, each organization is really doing much to report such crimes, because I'm not sure we have a lot of community reporters or refugee reporters, here in Nigeria to report such incidents. And as a journalist, sometimes I find it very difficult to have access to the camp where we can do stories on refugees and all that. These are my questions. I don't know if something is done from the nation to ensure that these stories are covered. We have a lot of crimes being committed, from other refugees entering to Nigeria. Okay. And then, so we have a lot of Nigerians too. Who are making their ways, in search of greener pasture to Libya, crossing the desert, in search for better living. And many of them, are being killed. Many of them are being kidnapped. So is there any mechanism or is there anything you people are doing to ensure that these stories are covered so that people get to know about what is happening in the world? Thank you.
So yeah, who wants to go first? Mudak?
I can talk about the access to, so the first question was about access and specifically to refugee camps in northern Cameroon. I agree that is so frustrating, and I've been in many places in many countries where you want to go into a place, specifically a refugee camp, where, as you said, There's lots of stories, lots of people want to talk. And I mean, I was actually just, last summer I was thrown out of a camp in Ethiopia, the Eritreans. What do you know about Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia? Not much, because they throw all the journalists out of the camps. At any rate, it's frustrating, but in terms of how to move forward, besides always continuing to play the game, do the paperwork, get the permissions that you can also do things, depends on the situation, but you can often find stories surrounding the camp. People leave the camp to go to jobs or to go to shopping or to, try to find, other resources that they can't get in the camp. So often I will find refugees on the streets outside of the camps if I can't get in the camp. In terms of the question about the last part of your question about Nigerians going to Libya and all of the crimes that happened to them on the way, I think that is a very important topic that is also very undercover. Like if you go to a camp or a detention center in Libya, almost everybody has a story about how they or someone they love was kidnapped or raped or killed on the way. It's so unbelievably widespread. It is undercovered. It should be covered more. And I hope you as a journalist are one of the people that takes it upon yourself to help, get that story out as much as possible. Not to put the problem on you, just to say that it's universally not covered enough.
Yeah, I like to add one thing about the access to the refugee camps. Of course, it's definitely is very much restricted. Most of those refugee camps, especially in the kind of a violent situation, especially maybe because of those kind of aid models. So international organization and local authorities try to control their resources, so how much they can supply and how much they can allow refugees to have access to the outside world, or let them move freely or something like depends on that. But another way I feel that that's very nice idea. Those refugees who came out and stay nearby come out and you try to talk with them. But those apart from those established UN, of course, most of them are friendly, but local authority are a little bit more strict. But international NGOs, there's various kind of hundreds of NGOs operating in different areas in most of the refugee camps, either providing help or food or education or something like that. Those may be kind of your window, kind of door to have access into. So you have, I once went into the camp with that one INGO, and then just simply kind of pretending as a member of that part of the INGO. And I even just simply went into the one remote unrecognized refugee camps in that very much hostile area, together with one Japanese monk, Buddhist monk, and pretend I'm an assistant, and I'm working for the Buddhist cause or something like that. So these local authority being, especially talking about my countries in Thailand, they are Buddhists. They revere or they respect the Buddhist monk. When you follow through that the Buddhist monk, they don't question much. Then you have to look for your own initiative and do things. And also about the crime. Of course, I'm very much support what Heather said. You need to keep reporting on that and make aware all those authorities and international communities, the world know about what's happening to these poor refugees. Especially the refugees are not only exploited from their original place, they are, even after they arrive in the refugee camps, they are violated their fundamental right to move around freely. They are violated their rights to seek for the what I call pay employment or something like that. So, but so for that, sometimes they're being a victim of human trafficking, and then some being threatened by the gang, violence gang or something like that. These are very much uncommon, what I call occasion or situation we have. So our main duty is just to keep report and look for the stories and make aware of that situation. That's all we can do, I feel that.
Yeah, or rather the very last question, and hopefully I can keep that promise. So we have this. So it goes thus. I worked with some Iranian refugees in Kabul in Afghanistan. It was a chance to document about refugees who were in one of the most refugee countries. Unfortunately, the Taliban arrested them 15th May. Me and my colleagues tried to ask from UNHCR about their situation, but did not give answers. So what are your recommendations regarding if you have yourself dealing with having difficulty tracking refugees that you are working with? So how do you think a journalist should go ahead with this?
I think that I need to start with, sorry about that, but I think that if the UNHCR is not giving updates, then the only way is around. So what Lewin was saying, which was great advice about teaming up with a more friendly NGO, find out if the Red Cross or even smaller NGOs are involved, and they might be able to share more information. And the other thing you might be able to do, I'm not sure what your resources are, is try to locate their families in Iran and get them on the phone, because if they are in Iran, far from the immediate danger of the Taliban, they might be more free to tell you what's going on. What do you think, Lewin?
Yeah, there's nowadays a lot of communication tools are available anyway. Although you're not physically going into there, you can just simply get the most information out of those local NGO, international NGOs, or camp leaders, or some people through the telephones or something. You can get a lot of information out of there to report on. So of course, to go there inside and do that, see the locations and report firsthand is nice. But sometimes, of course, we cannot get it. So sometimes if it is too difficult and too huge obstacles ahead, we have to go around or something. We are a reporter. We need to report to something anyway. It's whatever you have it, and then we can describe the situation as well. This is one reporting as well. For example, like if you have had a very, very serious situation happen in a camp, but you are not allowed into, or you don't have access to and you ask question to the authority, they didn't answer, they didn't let you go in there. This is a new again, I feel that.
Okay, so I'll let you catch your breath for 30 seconds. I'll come back to you. So journalists, I'd like to share some resources with you regarding how to report on refugee communities. And the first one is these are really impressive International Journalism Network, IJNet.org, which you have on your screen right now. And it contains the resources to guide you in reporting on different aspects of refugee communities. And I'm going to put this link in the chat box so you can have quick access to them, irrespective of what aspect of refugee issues that you are very interested in reporting. And I'm trying to paste it here. Okay, so the link I just put in the chat box will take you where I am.
Thank you.
And you can easily navigate, and I think it has everything. It has aspects of narrative and research. It has aspects of technical production, mental health, editorial approaches, safety, and risk assessment. These are some of the issues that we've already discussed extensively today, and are inexhaustive. So please, I don't think there is a one-way approach to it. And like Dorcas rightly pointed out, that advice on going to the markets to talk to refugees when the international organizations seem to be doing a lot of gatekeeping is actually a very good strategy. So please keep safe and continue to do the reporting, and whatever you think we can help you with, we'll be able to do that. So as we go into the last 4-minute stretch of the extra 30 minutes that we had to add to this session, I would like Hina to start with helping us with a brief summary in 1 minute of what you think the take-home message should be, and Lauren should go directly lately. What are your thoughts regarding the current state of media coverage of refugee communities? What do you think journalists should still do? What should they stop doing? And what are the prospects? So I start with hip hop.
Okay, thank you. I think in terms of one of the things that are among the information in the link that you sent is the information I didn't know, where apparently a lot of stories about refugees don't include refugees' voices, and also don't say anything about the refugees, such as their jobs or how many children they have, or like something that makes them a person outside of the fact that they're a refugee. All refugees are, like that's a term, but they're all just people that something extraordinary happened to. And it could happen to anybody just the same as it happened to that person. So I was surprised by those statistics that didn't include that information, but I guess it's something that we were reading this and we'll all take away from it, that let's make sure we're not part of that. The other thing I just wanted to mention, like in that note, is, and this is kind of a little side note, is that we talk about IDPs, internally displaced people. In that note, sometimes you see in writing IDPs written as, and there was 400 IDPs in the camp, and then the IDPs got fed this amount of sugar a month. So like also doing things like writing the acronym IDP instead of the families or the people. It does kind of depersonalize the situation. So if I was to take anything away from this, and I wanted everyone to take away from it, is that your interest in refugees as people and covering them alone is enough to get started in terms of doing empathetic and personalized reporting. So I hope everyone here continues to do more of it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the ICFJ, for congratulations for your works with the reporting on refugees, and for all the journalists. Main thing I like to re-emphasize what I have already said, it is like there's a lot of issues and underlying issues on refugees, So not only about the current crisis or emergency or something like that, the refugee issue is unsolved long-term problems. So we have a lot of situation we have to look into and report, so that the war, what I call notice or try think in the other way, what actually happened to or something like that. For example, like a few refugee camps, like Rohingya Muslim refugee camps. I reported Rohingya refugee camps issue back in 1991. So quite a long time ago, there was a crisis, nearly 500,000 Rohingyas fled. At the time, it was a kind of the crisis, and the war paid a lot of attention. UNHCR paid attention. Later on, the issue became a little bit of fading away. And then, but when you look at it, whether these refugee camps are resolved or all the refugees have able to return home or resettle in the host country, or it's different, no. There's a remaining refugees camp, thousands and thousands of them. And then there's another refugee crisis come back in 2017 again. And then the war kind of a lot. Oh, there's another crisis and refugees, Rohingyas, and they pay attention again. So I'm afraid that there will be some similar incidents that happen for those refugees who are encamped in those kind of they are camps and then without futures or something like that. So there's a lot of issues, and also very important that we didn't mention about it. Of course, we did a little bit mention about that stigma or that issue. When we are talking or portraying all the time refugee as a burden for the world community, and then those people are getting a problem, and then we have to support or face or at the cost of our communities or something like that. We cannot be portraying in that way. Of course, there's a lot of issue. We can just look at it. Like those refugees who settle in America and in Europe, they contribute, how they contribute, and how they become who they are. And then that sort of positive situation, positive reporting is important as well. And also for that a little bit of advocacy issue for the health and education, women issue, that kind of things. We have so many issues and things to report on. So mainly, that's why my emphasis is not looking at only into the political crisis or climatic dramatic issues which cause or which drive refugees out of their original place. But there's a lot of issues going on, and our duty, our responsibility is to let world aware of the situation and are willing to help.
I think Lewin is really, really passionate about this about the subject, and I really, really agree with you, considering especially your personal experience and the importance of the issue. Something that you first said at the beginning of the presentation continues to resonate and continues to hold true, which simply means anybody at any time can actually become a refugee if the circumstances work together to make an individual a refugee. And that's something that is really, really important in our reportage of refugee communities in different parts of the world. I want to appreciate where our panelists today. You've been amazing, you've been extraordinary. I can see somebody even asking that this session deserves certificates, just to imagine how thorough you've been. So really, really thank you very much. And I know Ida promised us something to share with our audience. If you can get across to me, I can pass it across to them, and I will do that. And for those, I've also seen questions regarding when the video will be available. The video will be available on the ICFJ YouTube page by tomorrow. But if you are not interested in waiting that long, if you want to actually see a video today, there is a place for you to get that video as soon as possible, and that is our Facebook group. So you can already see that we are actually streaming this session live on our Facebook page. So immediately this session is over, you can actually see the video played on this page. So I encourage you to be part of our forum and join our community on Facebook. All you just have to do is click the link that I put in the chat box, and you're going to be part of that forum, and we'll be able to share resources with you as much as we have, even facilitate whatever additional requests that you have. So please and please do not hesitate to actively engage with us. And in addition to the resources that we shared from the International Journalist Network, there are several other resources regarding media reportage that I think you should check out on IJNet's website. So IJNet's website is really, really easy to navigate. It's something I also use personally. I'm a journalist. All you have to do is just go to IJNet.org. And this is a page on refugee communities. If you just click IJNet right away, it takes you to the home page. And some of the things you can get on IJNet's website includes the toolkits on different issues, and you can also get access to opportunities for you, training, new job opportunities for you as a journalist. And to know more about this particular forum, ICFJ Pamela Howard Global Crisis Reporting Forum, please check out ICFJ's website on www.icfj.org. And it's amazing what we can do when we have access to you as journalists. Please and please actively engage with us. And we are glad that you can be part of the conversations today. So to everybody that stayed to the very end, this was a really, really long one. And thanks to Lewin and Hida for being extra patient with us and enjoying the session. And thank you very much to the amazing team at VOA. You made it extraordinarily amazing for us. We enjoy working with you, and we look forward to doing more together. So to every participant, thank you very much, and I enjoy the rest of your day. Either bye.
Bye.
Good luck. Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
For all the participants. Yeah.